Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession. This is the story of the betrayal of trust. A tale of jealousy, greed, and calculated violence. This case will leave you wondering, what lengths will someone go to when their perfect life is on the line? And how could someone so close, someone you trust, become capable of such unspeakable acts? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and tragic story of the betrayal of trust. The story begins in the serene town of Rivermount, where life seems peaceful, almost too perfect. But behind closed doors, secrets are brewing that will shake the entire community to its core. One winter morning, 35-year-old Ivy Daniels, a beloved teacher, fails to show up for work. Her co-workers assume she's unwell, but by nightfall, her absence begins to stir concern. Her husband, Mark Daniels, reports her missing, claiming she went out for a morning jog and never returned. He described her morning routine, saying she often jogged along the same path near the riverbank, a route she was familiar with. But as hours passed and there was still no sign of Ivy, the sense of worry began to settle in. Local authorities were notified, and a search party was organized immediately. Still, there was no trace of Ivy anywhere along the jogging route or nearby areas. What starts as a missing person case quickly spirals into something far darker. Ivy Daniels, a well-respected teacher in the quiet town of Rivermount, disappeared on a cold winter morning without a trace. The day started like any other. Ivy left her home early for her usual morning jog, but when she failed to show up for work later that day, her coworkers began to grow concerned. Her absence seemed uncharacteristic, as Ivy was known for her punctuality and dedication. Her students, who adored her, were left wondering why their favorite teacher hadn't arrived to start the day. Her family, friends, and the town of Rivermount were gripped with fear. No one could understand how someone could vanish so suddenly. Mark's distress seemed genuine, though as the hours turned into days, a few unsettling details began to surface. The police started to ask questions, and Mark's account of the events began to show subtle signs of inconsistency. He told investigators that Ivy had left early in the morning, but neighbors had reported hearing the couple arguing the night before. While it wasn't unusual for married couples to have disagreements, the timing of the argument raised red flags. The search continued, but there were no clues that pointed to Ivy's whereabouts. Her phone was turned off, and her credit cards had remained untouched. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. As the investigation advanced, the mystery deepened. Ivy's family and friends described her as someone who would never leave without telling anyone. She had a close relationship with her sister Clara, and the two kept in constant contact. Clara was the first to notice something odd, a cryptic note Ivy had left behind at work. In the bottom drawer of her desk, hidden among papers and lesson plans, was a piece of paper with a short, unsettling message, "I can't live like this anymore." It wasn't clear if the note was a desperate cry for help or something more sinister. The discovery of the note raised even more questions. Was Ivy planning to run away? Did she have someone helping her? And if so, why? What did she mean by "I can't live like this anymore"? Clara couldn't make sense of it. She knew her sister had been under stress recently, struggling with personal issues, but this note made her fear the worst. In the days that followed, rumors began to spread throughout Rivermount. Mark's public plea for his wife's return seemed genuine, but there were whispers about the state of the couple's marriage. Some said Mark had been distant and preoccupied in recent months, while others speculated about possible financial difficulties. As more time passed without any sign of Ivy, the people of Rivermount started to wonder, was Mark the grieving husband he appeared to be, or was he hiding something more sinister? The town waited anxiously for the next clue, but little did they know that the truth would be far more chilling than anyone could imagine. The search for Ivy Daniels had just begun, and already, the town of Rivermount was shrouded in doubt. The deeper investigators dug, the more they uncovered, but nothing prepared them for the shocking revelation that was just around the corner. Days passed with little progress in the investigation, and the search for Ivy Daniels grew more desperate. The entire town of Rivermount was on edge, wondering what had happened to the beloved teacher. Then a breakthrough came. A fisherman, out early one morning, stumbled across Ivy's fitness tracker, washed up on the bank of the river. It was a strange place to find it, especially considering Ivy's usual route didn't lead anywhere near that area. The tracker, still functional, revealed the last movements of Ivy before she disappeared. What was most chilling was not just the data it provided, but the fact that it didn't suggest she had gone for a casual jog at all. The tracker showed an unusually long, unexplained pause before the signal abruptly cut off. The trail didn't lead to an accident or any natural disaster. It led to something more ominous. It seemed like someone had planned the entire thing. The authorities, now with more focus, began retracing Ivy's last known steps, but they were forced to look deeper at the circumstances surrounding her life. Mark Daniels, her husband, became more of a person of interest with each passing day. While his public pleas for help were still frequent, small discrepancies started to surface. At first, it was subtle the way Mark described certain details of the morning. He had mentioned Ivy leaving at 6 a.m. for her jog, but the neighbors hadn't seen her. In fact, no one had seen her that morning at all. He said Ivy had been excited about the day ahead, but when friends were questioned, they revealed a different story. She had seemed anxious about something, although no one knew exactly what. Things took a darker turn when investigators uncovered something unexpected. A few weeks before her disappearance, Ivy had been acting strangely around her finances. She had confided in her sister Clara about some significant debts that were weighing on her. At first, it was just the typical strain of life bills, mortgages, the usual, but Ivy had become increasingly stressed over her husband's financial troubles. Mark had made poor decisions with a business venture that had left them with mounting debts. Despite his outwardly calm demeanor, the stress had begun to take its toll. Clara was hesitant to reveal it, but eventually she opened up to the police. It was clear now that there had been more to Ivy's life than met the eye. The deeper they looked, the more they found: hidden bank accounts, unexplained transfers, and purchases Ivy had never mentioned. But the most startling discovery came when a local diner waitress, Brianna Hart, was brought into the investigation. Brianna had worked part-time at the same place Ivy had frequently visited. She was known to be friendly with Mark, but what the investigators didn't know was the extent of their relationship. Brianna, now under questioning, admitted she had been seeing Mark for some time. In fact, she was having an affair with him. It was something she had tried to keep hidden from the public eye, but as the investigation deepened, Brianna finally revealed that Mark had promised her a future together once Ivy was out of the way. She told detectives that Mark had often made cryptic comments about starting over, about needing to get rid of obstacles in his life. Brianna claimed she had no idea of his involvement in Ivy's disappearance, but as her story unfolded, it painted an even darker picture. While Mark's personal life seemed more and more complicated, the police couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that something far more sinister had taken place. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. Mark's debts, his affair with Brianna, and now the strange disappearance of his wife were all pointing in one direction: toward a man desperate to eliminate everything standing in the way of his perfect life. Yet, even with all this new information, there was no concrete proof that Mark had played a direct role in Ivy's disappearance. The case remained unsettlingly ambiguous, but with every new detail, the town of Rivermount grew more certain of one thing: someone close to Ivy was hiding something. And soon the truth would come out in the most unexpected of ways. The breakthrough came when Ivy's car was discovered, submerged in a remote lake several miles from her home. It was a fisherman who first noticed the faint outline of the vehicle beneath the murky water while casting his line. When authorities arrived, they quickly identified the car as Ivy's, confirming it had been missing since the day she vanished. Inside, the scene was chilling. There were no signs of struggle, and the car appeared to have been parked deliberately before being abandoned in the lake. It was as if someone had carefully planned this final step in the disappearance. What stood out the most was the blood-stained scar found in the back seat. The blood was confirmed to belong to Ivy, and forensic analysis suggested the amount was enough to indicate a serious injury, possibly even fatal. Yet there was still no body to confirm her death. The discovery, however, raised more questions than answers. How had Ivy ended up in the car? Had she been forced into it? Was she already unconscious when it was submerged? With the car found, the investigation took a new turn. Authorities immediately began focusing their efforts on the evidence inside. They had the scarf, but that wasn't enough. They needed more to confirm their suspicions. After a meticulous search of the area, police uncovered something even more disturbing: a trail of footprints leading away from the lake, but none leading back. The footprints, freshly disturbed, suggested someone had walked away from the car and disappeared into the woods nearby. That someone was Mark Daniels. Mark had already become the prime suspect in the case. His affair with Brianna, the mounting debts, and the cryptic message Ivy left behind all painted him in a suspicious light. The discovery of the car did nothing to alleviate the doubts surrounding him. Investigators now began to examine his every move, searching for a motive or a link that connected him to Ivy's disappearance. Mark had been careful, but something about his behavior seemed off. It didn't take long before authorities found another chilling clue. A search of Mark's office revealed an alarming pattern. Hidden in a drawer was a life insurance policy, one that would pay out a significant amount in the event of Ivy's death. The policy had been updated just months before her disappearance, with Mark listed as the primary beneficiary. It wasn't unusual for people to update life insurance policies, but the timing of this revision raised suspicions. Had Mark been planning to collect the payout all along? Was this why he was so eager to be rid of Ivy? As detectives dug deeper into Mark's life, they uncovered another unsettling piece of evidence: prescription sedatives. A pharmacy receipt from a few days before Ivy's disappearance listed multiple doses of a sedative that Mark had purchased. The medication was commonly used to treat anxiety, but it was also known to have a sedative effect. The authorities now had a theory. Mark may have drugged Ivy, rendering her unconscious before carrying out whatever plan he had in mind. They needed to confirm if the drugs had been in Ivy's system, but toxicology reports would take time. Meanwhile, the focus shifted to the cabin owned by Mark's best friend, Dylan Pierce. The cabin had been a frequent getaway spot for the two men, and it was one of the last places anyone had thought to search. When investigators arrived, they found nothing out of the ordinary, but a closer look revealed a hidden stash of items, some of which were disturbingly familiar. Among the belongings were photographs of Ivy and Mark, several of which had been taken without their knowledge. As investigators pieced together these new findings, they began to wonder, was this really Mark's doing, or was there someone else involved? Dylan's connection to the journal was undeniable, but was he simply an accomplice, or was there something even darker behind it all? The evidence continued to pile up, but it wasn't enough to make an arrest, not yet. Still, one thing was certain: Mark Daniels had gone to great lengths to conceal his actions, and with each new discovery, the truth seemed more elusive than ever. The investigation was far from over, and the town of Rivermount was on the edge of its seat, waiting for the next twist in the case. As the investigation continued to unravel, new details emerged that seemed to point more squarely at Mark Daniels. Authorities had long suspected him of being involved in his wife Ivy's disappearance, but the evidence they had was circumstantial at best. That changed when Dylan Pierce, Mark's best friend, came forward with a stunning confession. Dylan admitted that he and Mark had made a pact years ago, one that would come into play if either of them found themselves facing financial ruin. If one of them needed to eliminate an obstacle, whether it was debt or a personal problem, the other would help. At first, Dylan had been hesitant to share the details of the pact, but as the investigation dug deeper, his conscience began to weigh heavily on him. He revealed that Mark had been the one to initiate the plan to get rid of Ivy, citing her as a problem standing in the way of their future. Dylan claimed he had backed out when the plan took a dark turn, unwilling to go as far as Mark had, but he could no longer sit back and ignore the truth. The confession seemed to confirm many of the investigators' suspicions, but there was still something unsettling about the situation. Dylan had been close to Mark for years, and yet he had never reported any of Mark's disturbing behavior. Dylan had seen Mark struggle with his debts and personal issues, but had he truly been unaware of the extent to which his friend was willing to go? Or was there something more to their friendship that they weren't yet seeing? Meanwhile, Brianna Hart, the young waitress with whom Mark had been having an affair, was becoming an even more significant figure in the investigation. Initially, Brianna had been reluctant to speak out, but as the case progressed, she revealed even more concerning details about her relationship with Mark. She admitted that Mark had asked her to provide an alibi for the morning of Ivy's disappearance. He had told her that Ivy was planning to leave him, and if that were true, it would ruin everything they had built together. Brianna had been pressured by Mark to lie for him, to tell authorities that she had seen Ivy leave their house on the morning of her disappearance. But Brianna's story wasn't as clear-cut as it seemed. She revealed that Mark had often talked about his desire to start over, his wish to have a life free of Ivy's financial troubles. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the life Mark wanted to create with her. He spoke about eliminating obstacles and starting fresh, a life where Ivy was no longer in the picture. Brianna now felt a great deal of guilt for her involvement, but she insisted she hadn't known what Mark was capable of. As the investigation moved forward, one critical piece of evidence came to light, something that would change the course of the case entirely. It was a handwritten journal found in the cabin that Mark and Dylan had frequented. The journal, filled with entries written in Mark's hand, detailed the weeks leading up to Evie's disappearance. It was a chilling account of how Mark had planned everything. From the sedative he had given Ivy to the exact moment he intended to put his plan into action. There were references to life insurance policies, financial struggles, and Ivy's impending departure, which Mark saw as a necessary step in his quest for freedom. This journal proved to be the smoking gun that investigators had been searching for. It was clear now that Mark had planned Ivy's murder with cold, calculated precision. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, Mark continued to deny his involvement. He maintained that he had been devastated by Ivy's disappearance, insisting that he had nothing to do with it. But the pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. Still, there was one question that remained unanswered: what had truly happened to Ivy? Mark's confession of planning her murder was chilling, but her body had never been found. Until that final piece was discovered, the case couldn't be considered truly closed. As investigators continued their search for answers, the people of Rivermount couldn't help but wonder, would they ever truly know the extent of Mark Daniels' deception? And if Ivy's body remained hidden, would justice ever be fully served? The suspense continued to mount, and the town anxiously awaited the final, devastating reveal. The search intensified. Teams scoured nearby forests, lakes, and remote areas where Mark might have hidden Ivy's body. With each passing day, the hope of finding her seemed to diminish. Then, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source, an old friend of Ivy's, Sarah Lawson, who had kept in touch with her after the disappearance. Sarah had always felt that something wasn't right. She knew Ivy well, and it was clear from their conversations that Ivy had never truly been happy in her marriage. What Sarah didn't know was that Ivy had once confided in her about a secret she had kept from everyone else. Ivy had been planning to leave Mark for months, and Sarah now realized that Ivy had hidden a crucial piece of information. Before she disappeared, she had recently purchased a piece of land on the outskirts of town. Ivy had told Sarah it was for a fresh start, a place where she could escape from the mounting pressure in her life. With Sarah's lead, investigators focused on the property, a small, overgrown piece of land that had been largely forgotten. As they scoured the area, something caught their eye: a freshly dug patch of earth hidden among the trees. It was small, unassuming, but something about it didn't sit right. Upon further inspection, they uncovered a shallow grave. The soil was disturbed in a way that suggested it had been recently dug, and as they carefully removed the dirt, the chilling discovery was made. There, buried beneath the earth, was Ivy's body. The confirmation was both a relief and a shock. Ivy Daniels had been murdered by the one person who was supposed to protect her. Mark's plan to rid himself of her had been executed with horrifying precision. He had buried her body in a remote area, hoping it would never be found. But the truth, as it always does, had come to light. The autopsy revealed the extent of the brutality Ivy had endured. She had been drugged, likely to subdue her, before being strangled. The cause of death was clear, but what was more unsettling was the discovery of bruises on her body, indicating a struggle. Ivy had fought for her life, and it was clear now that she had known the danger she was in. She had tried to escape, but Mark had been too determined, too desperate. Mark was arrested on charges of murder, and the town of Rivermount was left to process the shocking reality of what had happened. His betrayal had been calculated, the result of his obsession with escaping the life he had built with Ivy. The affair, the debts, the life insurance policy, each piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, revealing a man driven by greed and fear. As Mark was taken into custody, the community could barely comprehend the depth of his actions. They had trusted him, and he had shattered that trust in the most unimaginable way. Ivy, the beloved teacher and friend, had been taken from them, and the town would never be the same. In the months that followed, the trial of Mark Daniels captivated Rivermount. The evidence against him was undeniable, and his defense crumbled under the weight of the testimony and facts presented. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even as the case came to a close, questions lingered in the minds of those who had followed it. How could someone who seemed so ordinary, so familiar, be capable of such a heinous act? What had truly driven Mark to kill the woman he had once promised to love? The answers, perhaps, would never fully come. But one thing was certain: Ivy Daniels had not been forgotten. Her legacy lived on, not just in the memories of those who loved her, but in the lessons her tragic death had taught them. Trust can be a fragile thing, and sometimes the darkest secrets are hidden behind the most familiar faces. The case was closed, but the haunting questions remained, leaving Rivermount forever changed. And so, the quiet town of Rivermount is left to pick up the pieces after a betrayal that shattered lives and exposed the darkest depths of human greed and deception. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Mystery Minds for more stories that uncover the chilling truths behind the crimes that haunt us. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.